The leisure demand has been impacted. There is no taking away from that. And you heard Shomit walk us through the various factors that could be at play that could affect the Indian aviation sector in times to come. But let's understand the flight ahead for airlines in general. For this, I'm joined by Ajay Awtaney, the founder of livefromlounge.com, and also retired IAS and aviation expert Dhiraj Mathur, who's an independent director and former partner with PwC, is also joining us. But first, coming to you, Dhiraj Mathur. Let's talk about Indigo and what happened over the weekend. This is the country's largest airline we're talking about. It operates around 1,600 domestic and international flights, and this on a day-to-day basis. So how serious do you reckon the problem is that Indigo faces when it comes to crew unavailability to fly those flights, considering that so many of its competitors, if you talk about Vistara, Air India, SpiceJet, Go First, they have had a significantly better punctuality, even if you look at what happened on the 2nd of July, when, on the other hand, you had Indigo, which was suffering the most. Why do you think that variance existed?
Well, see, when it comes to hiring, Indigo, SpiceJet are the existing airlines, right? The Go Air. So if there is staff to be poached, it's going to be from these airlines. And therefore, they're going to have they'll probably take the greatest hit. It is a fact that you have two new airlines. Air India is ramping up. So there is going to be a requirement for additional staff, both pilots as well as flight crew. This is a transition. You know, there is a sudden sort of expansion in supply. And so there isn't, because of the pandemic and so on, and the general slowdown. There was also a slowdown in new trainees coming into the system. So I guess this is a transition phase as the airline industry moves from a pre-pandemic level to a post-pandemic level. Now, on the one hand, and also has these additional airlines come on stream. So it'll take maybe 6 months, maybe a year and a half for this staff churn to settle down. But I mean, I wouldn't like sort of lose sleep over it. It's certainly a very big issue for Indigo, which used to pride itself on Indigo stand the time. But
But let me take that across to Ajay Awtaney and see if he is having sleepless nights about what we experienced over the weekend, looking at its perhaps long-term impacts. Yes, the pandemic had a role to play. But there are reports that are suggesting that the Indigo crew has been unhappy because the pay cuts enforced during the pandemic, those have continued even through the even though we've seen those restrictions getting lifted. And despite the fact that there is a revival in the demand for air travel, which we also understand is in trouble, looking at the latest data that my colleague Shomit was walking us through. So my question is, I mean, attrition could be a natural fallout. Is there likely to be further erosion of personnel and that could afflict other airlines? And if that is the case, then how damaging do you think it can be for the health of the sector, both in the near and the short term?
See, what's happened over the weekend was clearly something that was most probably intended to pass a message to the management of Indigo, and I would imagine the message has been received. And I hope Indigo's management is looking at whatever the problems are seriously, and they will be resolved. Coming to if this is the indication of a wider systemic malaise, let me just circle back to the pandemic. Even during the pandemic and when layoffs happened and so on, the people who were let go by any airline were not the frontline staff. You invest a lot of money in training even a cabin crew member and, of course, a cockpit crew. Pay cuts happen, yes, but none of the frontline staff were let go. So obviously, there is no airline at this point of time who wants to let their cabin crew or cockpit crew go. And if they choose to still go, obviously, there is a set process and a notice period.
A little bit of a tricky, patchy connection. Dhiraj, Mathur, do weigh in on this. If I remember correctly, in a similar event that took place even in April this year, pilots had gone on mass sick leave and the airlines had suspended some for violating the terms of employment. But even if you imagine that Indigo pilots saw that 28% salary cut and their flying allowances had been halved, this kind of mass leave has to be in contravention of the laws of the land. What are the options before an airline in such events where employees go on mass leave, like they did at Indigo? And do you think the aviation sector in India can afford to kind of put them in place? Any options that they might even have legally?
See, yeah, I mean, that's a very valid point. We may have legal options. Of course, there are legal options, but would you like to enforce them against your employees, especially in a situation where they have other options available to them? So I don't think that would be a very wise move for Indigo to try and take legal action. I think because they need to retain their employees, so they need to retain talent, and they need to therefore address the grievances of the employees. I mean, yeah, certainly there were people who were let go, and then there were pay cuts that took place, and these have to be restored. And if you don't restore them, your competition will. So it's in the long run, it's in your own interest to have loyal and satisfied employees. So they definitely have to address this issue. But again, I still feel that apart from the grievances that some employees or a large number of employees have, this is also a systemic issue that there hasn't been, there was a time when you had a number of training schools and so on, and the number of both cockpit and flight crew, that were entering the market was increasing steadily as the aviation sector in India grew, and it continues to be amongst the fastest growing one. So, but the pandemic slowed that down, both in terms of reduced operations and
But
staff
Dhiraj, Mathur,
being
do
let
you
go.
expect a pickup? Because now we're looking at passenger load factors going down right now. Do you think this is a natural phenomenon at this stage when we are seeing an uptake, or do you think there are deeper issues that the aviation sector has to brace for, even as we are trying to contend with high ATF prices? That hasn't gone out of the window. So there are problems that the aviation sector has to contend with. Then if your on-time performance gets impacted, passengers get inconvenienced, flights don't take off on time, all of that is going to impact the long-term nature of the aviation sector. And we are looking at it at a time when jet is getting back in the air. And of course, we have a Casa Air that is coming into play as well.
Yeah, so look, I mean, if you look at the aviation sector, the fundamental issues that confront it continue to do so for the last several years. And that's basically ATF and the taxation structure. A lot of some of the other issues have been addressed by the government, infrastructure improvement and so on. There is the Udan scheme connecting small destinations. There is a huge investment in airport infrastructure. So a lot of issues are being looked at, but the fundamental issue of high ATF prices continues to plague the sector. And until that is addressed by the government, either by bringing aviation fuel into the GST ambit, or just looking at reducing the duties and taxes on aviation fuel, this it will always be a constraint, a drag on the growth of the sector.
Ajay
But
Awtaney,
having said that,
Ajay Awtaney, does it bother you that the passenger load factor is actually declining in the month of June? You think it's a blip right now, or do you think there are some more deep-rooted issues that the aviation sector will have to contend with as it deals with other problems, like I mentioned?
Look, aviation is a cyclical sector at the end of the day. We have two high seasons every year and we have two low seasons. And what happened in June is partly leading into the July to September season, which is traditionally been a low season. School vacations are over, so all the tourism demand might start to dry up. And a lot of other things, people generally, this was the first time in 2 years people were able to travel for vacations or holidays or whatever. So that's one part of the equation. The other part is international destinations have started to open up, and people who still want to vacation now have started to, I guess, prefer international destinations like Bangkok, Dubai, which is very easy to get to from India, by the way. And hence, the domestic leisure demand has also slowed down because of that. Having said that, all is not bad. I think we will settle at something like 300,000 passengers a day, or 320 or 315, whatever. And I think this is what the trend will show for, I guess, the whole of July to September quarter. And then, as the festivals come back, Durga Puja is there, and then there's Diwali and so on, and Christmas. So the next quarter will again be a great quarter. So I'm not too worried about this. I think the only thing the government can do, apart from obviously the long time demand of ATF under GST and so on, MRO demand and so on, I think there is still a leftover from the COVID times, which is a 15-day, a booking window of 15 days. There are floors and caps.
Yes.
If that goes away, that will totally unleash all the airlines into doing some sort of spot sales, which will start seeing inventories pick up again then.
Fair enough. So neither of you who track the aviation sector so closely believe that this is a problem that we need to lose sleep over, that these are issues that airlines can contend with. And since we are seeing the entry of airlines, the revival of one airline, the aviation sector in India is going to look busier, both on the domestic and the international front, and we'll keep tracking it. For the moment, of course, there are these headwinds. We'll see how they maneuver themselves through this turbulence. Thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on this, Ajay Awtaney and Dhiraj Mathur.